Hey, and welcome to episode number 120 of the Brave Widow Show. Today, I speak with Ilissa, who shares her story of widowhood and healing. But before we dive into the episode today, I just want to let you guys know if you are listening to this in real time, that I am hosting a 3-day grief to growth challenge. Now, this challenge is totally free. Every day, I will be going live on Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, and you can join in and learn some of the basics in grief that I wish I would have known. We're going to talk about grief myths and about how what you learn throughout your life is incorrect about grief, all of the myths that you've been taught, all of the misconceptions about grief that feel like they don't resonate with you, that cause you to feel unseen and misunderstood. We're going to talk about all that. We are going to talk about guilt and grief and what to do about guilt, how to break free from the chains of guilt, regret, and deep yearning. And we are even going to talk about guilt and grief with dating and building new relationships. You need to join me on this 3-day challenge. To join the challenge, you can go to bravewidow.com/challenge. And this first challenge is going to run November the 5th through the 7th. If you're listening to this after those dates, still go to bravewidow.com/challenge to sign up for the next live event. But if you are listening to this podcast real time, you can go to bravewidow.com/challenge to sign up and join us for this free 3-day grief to growth challenge. All right, let me introduce you to Ilissa. Ilissa is a brain cancer widow and a solo mom now to 2 boys. All right, let's dive into her story. Ilissa, welcome and thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, I know our audience would love to know more about you and about your background and your story. So, if you wouldn't mind to just introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
My name is Ilissa Jones. I am now 35 years old and I was widowed on February 22nd of 2024. My husband had battled brain cancer for 12 years and we were married for 11. So the majority of our marriage, he battled his battle. Prior to, we had a couple good years while we were dating. We were together for a total of 15. So it's really crazy that half of my life so far just about was with my husband. So I guess I'll start with from the beginning so I don't miss anything because I could probably talk for hours since he battled for 12 years. But brain cancer is an evil that I wish on nobody. And it is definitely not for anybody who doesn't have a lot of strong will and strong faith. And it's definitely a story that a lot of people have been inspired by. So I'm happy to share it on here with you guys. Chris and I met when I was 19 years old. And one of my friends, we were supposed to go to a movie, and we were literally at the intersection of her neighborhood, and we were about to turn right to go to the movie theater. And she gets a phone call from one of her other friends, and she said, "Hey, are you coming to the barbecue tonight?" And she looks at me, and I'm like, "No, we're going to the movies. We are going to the movies." She says, "Yeah, is it okay if I bring a friend?" I'm like, "Oh my God, here we go." So she looks at me after she hangs up the phone. She's just for a few minutes, then we'll leave. And I was like, fine. I was a huge movie buff back in the day, and I still like my shows. I just like to escape from reality and just enjoy a good rom-com or comedy show. I love to laugh. So we get there, and one of the guys that lived in the house, he came out and greeted us, and he was like, "Hey, who's your friend? Is she single?" And I was like, "Oh God, I had just gotten through a big bad breakup. Like, I'm not interested in anything right now." He tries to introduce me to this other guy that was there at the party, and I was just not interested. But when they had told me they were going to introduce me to somebody, when my husband came out of the master bedroom, I was like, oh, I hope that's the guy. But
Yes,
it
that
was
changed your mind really quickly.
a little bit, but he had a girlfriend at the time. But he kept talking to me all night, which made it really awkward. And so then I didn't see him again for probably about 6 months after that. And I had reached out to the gentleman or the guy that they were trying to hook me up with that evening. And he was the GM at one of the gyms. And I just wanted to work at the front desk and have a free gym membership because I was going through college. And he was like, yeah, we could use a front desk person. So come on in. And he calls Chris and says, guess who's coming in to fill out paperwork? I'll be there in 30 minutes. And so it was funny while I was there. He was like, hey, you remember Chris Jones, don't you? And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember Chris Jones. But so then I started working there, and he was there at the beginning of my shift till the end of my shift. I only had a 4-hour shift every now and then. And the first couple times he asked me out, I was conveniently busy, but not busy. And eventually went out on our first date, and I learned that he was 8 years older than me. I had no idea he was 8 years older than me. And he told me, he said, I'm 27. And I was like, oh, I said, you just barely missed the cutoff, didn't you? For this to be legal. But anyways, that's how it started. And then after I think a year of dating, I moved in with him, and he started to have these episodes, and diabetes runs in his family. So his left hand and his arm would start to tingle and go numb. If you've ever had like a leg or arm or something fall asleep, that's what it would feel like, except he literally had no control over it. So little did we know that those were actually focal seizures that he was having. And these happened for quite a while. And he would just start to carry snacks and juices and stuff. And for whatever reason, sugar all along the way, which is cancer loves, always made him feel better and helped him to come out of seizures and stuff a lot quicker. But so he had those off and on. And then he was driving to the airport, and I had just gotten over to my parents' house to have dinner, and he was leaving to go out of town. And he calls me, and I'm thinking, what time is it? You're supposed to already be on the plane. How are you calling me right now? And he said, I had a seizure, a full-blown grand mal seizure. He said, I urinated myself. He said, I drove 5 miles past the airport, which freaked me out because when you have a seizure and you're in this disoriented state, I'm like, thank God you didn't hit anybody. And I said, hold on, I will drive down there and get you. And he's, no, I'm feeling a little bit better. I feel like I can drive myself to the closest hospital. I said, please don't, or call an ambulance. So I'm in a frantic mode. I'm getting in my car. My mom hops in with me. Now, this is on one of our interstates that we had a toll booth. And I literally get to the toll booth, and I throw my coins in, and my car dies. I
Oh,
ended up having my transmission blew right there. I was the next car to go and to get to him. And so I still don't understand why that happened. It was just absolute crap luck. And so I call Chris. I'm like, I can't get to you. Like, my car, it's broken down. I'm having to tell people to back up. Like, I can't get through. And so he winds up getting to driving to, there's this hospital called Grady. And they won't see me for 6 hours unless I have a gunshot wound. So then he drives all the way up to Northside for Forsyth. They do an MRI and all this stuff and all these different tests. And they come back in and they say, you have a cyst on your brain. And I was like, I've never heard of a cyst on the brain before. This is weird. And so my mom looks at him and she's, Chris, this is very serious. You need to go get another opinion. And he went and he got 5 other opinions, and they all said he had a tumor. They all looked at the exact same images, and some said it's small enough, it's the size of a golf ball, you can wait, we can watch it. And then some said, no, you should probably get it out while it's small because we don't even know what grade it is. So after a lot of convincing, I was pro-surgery. And I know that's scary going into your brain. I could not even imagine because it is the engine of your body. So he decided to go with surgery, and he wound up going to a doctor in Arizona. He was traveling was not an issue. His parents had a vacation house in Arizona at the time, so that helped out. He had the surgery, and the doctor comes back in afterwards and he says, we missed a little bit. We have to go back in again while the incision's fresh. So they went back in and got the rest of it. And the doctor, we felt pretty good because the doctor said, hey, we got 100% of it. 100% to me means great. He's not going to have to worry about this again. That's awesome. And at that time, they did not follow up with any chemo or radiation. Since then, things have changed and they would now. But we get back home on the airplane, and it's probably a week later. Chris is feeling pretty good. We go to the gym, we go and to Kroger and pick up sushi, and we're eating sushi and watching the news. And all of a sudden, he just doesn't feel right. And he immediately starts to lose his entire left side of his body. And I'm freaking out because his speech is starting to be slurred. He can't move. And I call the emergency room doctor on call over in Phoenix, where he had his initial surgery. And they said, you need to get him to whatever hospital is the closest. So we go back and we are at the closest hospital, which I won't say so that I don't slander their name. But they do an MRI. I'm having to speak for him because he cannot speak. He's in a wheelchair. He can't walk. He cannot move his whole left side of his body. And they do an MRI and they tell me he's having a seizure. He just needs more anti-seizure medication. We're going to keep him overnight. And I said, when do we get to see the doctor? And I don't want to see this one doctor because they misdiagnosed him. I want to see a different doctor. And so they admit him. It was probably like 3 hours later. I said, he's not getting better. He's getting worse. And the anti-seizure medication you gave him is not working. He's still in his seizure. This is not good. And they said, Dr. So-and-so will be back in the morning. And I said, that is the doctor I told you I did not want to see. I said, so we're leaving. I said, I want you to go get his discharge papers. He can either leave by ambulance or I can take him, but we're leaving. And we leave. They discharge him, which was great because I have never been ugly to anybody before, but I got pretty nasty in there. And that was the day that I grew a backbone for sure. I
And that had
learned
to
that.
be just a terrifying situation when you're almost feeling relieved, feeling like, oh, yeah, 100% we're good. Everything's fine. Probably exhausted getting back from that trip. And then it's like, why can't I catch a break? Like, what's happening now? Like, I can't even really imagine what that had to be like for you.
Yeah, the roller coaster ride of the highs and the lows that he went through is just insane. And so we went down to Emory, and Emory looked at the exact same scans, and they said, you have a very severe brain infection. We're having to do emergency surgery. They had to discard a pretty large portion of his skull, which he was not happy about when he woke up. And he had this divot. He was in sales, and image was everything to him. So to have this huge divot, his first concern was, when can I get that fixed? Not how bad was my infection. And then he had to have a port put in and a round of IV antibiotics that had to be shipped to the house. But after that, we went through a stint of probably about 5 or 6 years where he was good. He had no progression, no real bad seizures. Everything was pretty kosher. And we decided to have our first child, and we had our first child, and then we decided to have a second. And so when I was pregnant with my second little boy, Chris started to have seizures again. And he had reoccurrence, and they decided to tackle it with chemo and radiation. Chris, he's honest with his company about it, and he did a lot of traveling. And at first, I wasn't happy with his company for basically letting him go because he wasn't performing, and it's no crap. He's got this lesion on his brain that's growing, and it's in a part of his brain that affected his cognitive ability, his processing, sometimes movement, since he would have seizures on his left side. But I guess they had to give a reason for letting him go. And they told him that they were going to keep him on for 6 months so that he could qualify for long-term disability, and that he did not need to work. They were still going to pay him. And that was the biggest blessing of all time, because he got, how Lincoln just turned 8. So he got just about 7 years with the boys of being able to stay home and be a present parent. And seven is a very important number in the Bible. Also, and I'll get to the number 11, but also is number 11. And Chris was diagnosed in 2011, and he was diagnosed on D-Day. So he always joked and said cancer waged war with him. So we did chemo and just radiostatic radiation. So it went everywhere because he didn't want to travel and go do proton radiation. And so then with that, he was good for 4 years after that.
So during this time, I know you must have imagined he might not make it. What am I going to do? How were you thinking about that over the years, off and on? Or were you thinking more that, oh, he's going to pull through, he's going to make it, we're going to be fine?
Scanxiety is a real thing. It is definitely a real medical diagnosis, and he and I both had it big time. Every time he went in for an MRI, which for part of the time it was every 6 months, then another time it was every 3 months, it was very nerve-wracking. And it became even more nerve-wracking when they started allowing you to view and see the radiology report before you spoke to the doctor, and you're sitting over there and you're Googling words and trying to figure out, is that a good word or is that a bad word? What does this mean? So the highs and the lows along the way, when Chris was first diagnosed, I looked up exactly his diagnosis. I looked up the median range for life. And I thought to myself, okay, every 5 years or so, the medical industry advances. There's always new advances. So I just prayed that there would continue to be things that would help advance him, maybe one time cure him. But the median range was 14 years and he lived 12. And every time Chris went into surgery, he had 7 total surgeries he had 2 removals or 2 resections, and then he had to put the prosthetic piece back in. But each time he had surgery, he wound up with infection too. And so that was always scary because that could kill him. There was just so many different times of highs and lows. And when the tumor came back and they did his last surgery, and they told us that it was here's where it gets a little tricky. They told us that in the old scale, because the scale was changing next year, it was a grade 3. In the new scale, it was a grade 4. But it would not be considered a glioblastoma because it responds better to treatment. And so at that time, my dad had told me about how he had ran into a person at work whose father was in his 80s and wound up taking this dog dewormer medicine called fenbenzolide. And Chris was basically scrapping around, what else can we do? What can we do? We can't let this beat me. He quit drinking. He was not an alcoholic by any means. He could hold his liquor pretty well. And at the drop of a hat, he quit drinking. He started cutting out his sugar as much as he could because he wanted to starve the cancer of anything and everything. And the willpower behind everything he did in the last 4 years of his life was just incredible. Through the times that he did not feel well, he still got up, he still went outside, he stayed busy, he stayed active, he made sure that he lived life to its fullest, and he enjoyed every day that he could. Chris he did not grow up going to church. He did not grow up with any real religious background. And I didn't grow up with a very big religious background myself, but I still grew up in the South. And us as Southerners, we do know that Jesus is real and he is our savior and there is a heaven. And so all through these last 4 years, just little things here and there, I really started to tell Chris more and more about it because I knew that time was limited and I wanted to make sure it was my goal that Chris would know and love the Lord and accept Jesus before he passed. And I even started to say the boys are pretty little, but say the Lord's Prayer with them every night. And I would see Chris out in the hallway and he would just be standing there, just listening, just all these things. And we kept Chris's illness, disease, everything he was going through from the boys until the last 2 months of his life. So the boys really, they had a very skewed way of thinking what their dad did for a living. They're like, I want to do what you do when I grow up, Dad. I want to stay
Yeah, I
home.
want to stay home and play with the kids. Yeah.
I want a sugar mama. But when did he start? It was about a year ago in August. We decided to do a clinical trial for Chris as a last ditch effort. Let's give it a go. And it was an immunotherapy type of a infusion drug. I don't remember the name of it, but so he decided to give that a try because it was still growing and it was still causing him issues. And we traveled up to Pennsylvania, up at UPenn for it. I do not know if that helped to progress his disease. Regardless, he had a incurable disease and he was wanting to try everything. So we did it, and through those treatments, he started to really lose his left side. So his balance, his coordination, he would have good days, he would have bad days. But there was this one day it was in September, and it really did start his major decline. And I found myself in church praying in the middle of the day. Especially all throughout, Chris had personality changes that I had to battle and overcome and try to navigate through. Is this you? Is this your medicine? Is this your drugs that you're on? Or is it part from the surgery? Is it swelling? But he had been out and he had just gotten done riding stand-up jet skis with the boys. And I thought, oh, well, that's awesome. Like, you could balance on there. That was wonderful. And he goes, and I'm inside cleaning. And all of a sudden, the boys come running into the house. Mom, Dad's in the ditch. And I said, what? And I'm running up the hill, and there Chris is. He had gone on his mountain bike up the hill, came down, And he claims he lost his balance, but the way he was acting in the ditch, he was acting like he had a seizure or a stroke. He could not stand up, his whole left side. He was squirming around, and I'm freaking out. The boys are, more so I'm freaking out because the boys have never seen their dad this way, and they're freaking out. So I told them to go back to the house, and I'm calling the ambulance. I'm calling my parents. And what irritated me the most about the ambulance is that they, because they could hear Chris screaming in the background, know that he did not want help, they did not come.
Oh no.
Everybody, my dad gets there, his dad gets there, we get him into the house, and his balance is beyond bad. And I'm like, honey, you need to go to the emergency room. You need to go. And there was no, he still had enough cognitive ability and self awareness at the time that there was no way I could manhandle him into the car. And even if we got to the emergency room, he would still be telling these people no. And everybody leaves. Chris says he's just going to go to bed. He gets up in the middle of the night, and I have never seen a man go timber so hard in my entire life. He cracks his head. I scream. I call the ambulance again. They get here. And because Chris could say his name, his birthday, and in his words, who the president was, which he was not a fan of the president. So he said some choice words. They would not take him. And I looked at the ambulance driver. I said, you have got to be kidding me. Like, I am begging you. This is the second time I have called you in less than 24 hours. You see him in there. He's bleeding. And they said, his bleeding somewhat stopped and we can't force him. I said, what do I need to have for you guys to take him? Like, this man, he does not have good balance. He can't walk. I know he's somewhat cognitively there, but he is not in his right mind. I need you to take him. I'm begging you. And they said, we can't kidnap somebody. So we get him back to bed. He's laying there. He's not sleeping well. He's tossing, he's turning. And I wake him up. I'm like, Chris, I need you to listen to me. I am begging you, please, let's go to the hospital. I said, do not let tomorrow be the day I have to wake up and tell the boys that their dad is no longer here with us because you were too stubborn to go. And so we get him there, and he wound up having a hematoma, some bleeding on the brain, and he got a little bit better over the time, and we continued to do the treatments. And until around Christmas Eve, Chris started having really severe headaches to the point where he could not function. And he wound up going back into the hospital he dealt with headaches from Christmas, basically all the way until January 18th. And January 18th, he went into the hospital and he did not come back home, really. A few times here and there, but in the hospital was when we learned that his tumor had just really grown. It had tripled in size. It was just insane seeing the images. It was really disheartening. And every time you saw those images, they were just really disheartening. And he wound up having multiple seizures while he was in there. At one point, I think he knew internally he was dying. He started to tell everybody goodbye. And I called my dad. I said, you need to get the boys up here right now because I do not know that he's going to make it overnight. And somehow he rallied back through all that, but he wound up having to be on a PCA pump of Dilaudid. There was nothing else that would touch his pain. He was drugged up pretty good. And while we were in there, I did a lot of praying. I did a lot of self-awareness. I had his oncologist come by before we were about to leave. And I said, can I talk to you in the other room before you go in there? He said, absolutely. And I told him, I said, I'm aware of what's happening. And I'm aware that we're out of options. And everybody else in there is not on the same page. He said, you were right. He said, there, we're at a point where the cancer has gotten ahead of us. We are no longer ahead of it. And once it gets ahead of us, we can't do much. It's going to cause more harm to the person than it is to the cancer. And so that conversation in there was the worst and the hardest conversation, I think. I feel for doctors that have to go through that. That is just so hard. I would never say I want to be a cancer doctor because I could not even imagine having to tell people, like, especially when they're 42 years old, this is it. You need to get your affairs in order. And so that really started the last little bit of absolute basically hell, because when we got home, while Chris was in there, they wound up putting a shunt in, having surgery to relieve pressure, and it was only for palliative care to help relieve pressure off the brain so that he would not he could live just a little bit longer, which he got a couple good days, but that was about it. But we got him home, and we were not home for maybe more than the weekend, or maybe 3 days. And Chris started having severe pain again. The oral meds were not working. So I called hospice, and we went into hospice. And when we went into hospice, I did not call it hospice to him. I called it the small hospital that would help with pain management, because he would flip out if I told him I was taking him to hospice. But that was what the doctor said. They said, you could come back here, but all we're going to do is manage your pain and send you back home, or put you in hospice here. So we went to hospice, and at 34 years old, having to make all these decisions, having to say, where's the best hospice place for my husband? Because I've heard horror stories about some of them, and who's going to take the best care of him? And do I want him to die at home or
Yeah.
not? And my biggest thing was, even though I'm sure he would have preferred to die at home, I could not have him die at home. My boys would be traumatized for life if their dad passed away at home. So we were in and out of the hospice center. That kind of started the decline of my relationship with my in-laws as well. It's definitely not, I haven't spoken to my father-in-law since my husband's funeral. My mother-in-law here and there, but the relationship's still not the same. It's definitely not what it was before.
And do you
Um,
attribute that like to them? Was that because they didn't want him to go to hospice, or maybe you didn't have a strong relationship with them before, or what do you attribute to that?
Before, they lived all the way across the country in Arizona. We saw them maybe once a year for a week for holidays. They had a big family text chat. They felt connected enough through that. But when I found out that it was stage 4, I told him, I said, you need to get here. You can come here, you can stay as long as you want, you can move here, but we all know that this could take an ugly turn pretty quickly. But I think the biggest thing is, my mother-in-law had a really bad experience with hospice with her parents around 2020, where nobody was allowed in. And I tried to explain to her, this is not that. Like, this hospice center is clean, it's nice. You can have as many people back there. You can come in here at 2 a.m. if you want. There's no set hours. But I think that the fact that I moved him to hospice because he needed the PCA pump to control his pain, the oral medications weren't doing it. And to see him in there in that much pain, I could do it. And so I tried to explain to her that right now, Chris is still somewhat good. So we're going to get his pain under control. And then we're going to move him back home. And I could only just imagine as a mother, it's hard to lose a child. For that, I can't even imagine that. But on the other side, I was his wife. I've been with him for 15 years. I know adult Chris very well. And it was just, and I think it was the fact that I was the one making all these decisions. And when I had to sign right then and there, they said, once he's able to talk to us, he can change this. But she said, does he want a do not resuscitate, a DNR? I had to make that decision. And my best friend went there with me to sign him into hospice. And she was over there crying her eyes out. And I'm just there in a daze trying to make this decision. Like, what do I do? There's no coming back from this. So would he even want to come back, or would he just want to just go on and move on? And so I signed the DNR. And later on, when Chris was better and his pain was more manageable and he could talk, I did ask him, I said, I can change this if you want me to, but do you want a DNR? And he's like, don't. He said, I do not, if I'm gone, leave me gone. I do not want to come back because this is painful. And then when we got back home, we had the medical bed, we had a ramp, we had all these things. It's definitely very eerie to have all those things in your home, and just reality really sank in, having all those things in your home. Chris, he, like I said, he did not have any faith background really. And so my mom and some other friends, some of her friends, they're Catholic. So they had a priest come by, and he came by multiple times over the course of Chris being between home and hospice. He probably went between home and hospice 3 times. And then he was in hospice and he stayed there because his pain was so bad. And Father Higgins really got to know Chris in this short amount of time. And Chris was baptized. And that was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire life. And even at the funeral, Father Higgins spoke about the peace that came over Chris when he was baptized. And it was probably, it's all a blur between all that, but maybe a few days after he was baptized, we went back into hospice and had to go by ambulance because we could not pick him up and get him in the car. And I was outside on the phone with my dad, and Chris was just resting inside, and he wasn't in like extreme pain then. So he was still somewhat within his right mind. And he's screaming for me. He's, Liz, come here. And so I run in there. What is going on? He's, get me out of here. And I said, you can't walk and I can't carry you, but we're not going anywhere. I said, what's going on? He said, it's too much. They're telling me too much. And I'm looking around a little creeped out. I'm like, who's telling you too much about what? He said, about the Bible. They want me to do too much. It's too much. And I said, the Bible's a great story. I think you should listen to them. And thinking about stories and about people saying that people come to visit them and they're in between worlds there at the end, I feel like he got a crash course on the Bible. And
That's
this
amazing.
was baptized. And then from that point on, everybody he interacted with, or he would just start talking. And these are people that had already passed away. It was incredible for somebody that may not believe in heaven. This is coming from a guy that never read the Bible before. That would not be something he would wake up in a frantic talking and just all these people that came to visit him that he would talk to while he was in there. There is definitely a heaven, and it's for sure that he is there. Chris did not have a will, which worked to my benefit greatly. with a lot of things. But I did have to make decisions about, where are we going to have his funeral? What are we going to do? Who's going to talk? What are we going to say? And I decided to have it at the Catholic Church because I didn't want to have it at a funeral home with somebody that didn't even know Chris. At least Father Higgins got to talk to him. And when I tell you that at the funeral, when Father Higgins started talking, and he started talking about what a wonderful guy Chris was and how he was a real man's man and could do all these things. And I went up to him after the service and I said, Father Higgins, I said, did you have any idea that Chris was diagnosed on D-Day? And he stepped back. He said, no. He said, I rewrote that service probably a handful of times, and I had no idea. For a priest to get up there and talk about Saving Private Ryan and D-Day is just so not your typical norm for a priest to do. And he was just taken back. And I said, Chris was there writing that with you. There is, without a doubt, he helped you write that. So I said, so in a way, I feel like he did write his own eulogy with him. And when everything was said and done, oh, and at the funeral, there were like I had to choose from some scriptures. And they said, who's going to read these? And I was like, I'll read one. And they were like, you don't need to read one. And I said, who else is going to read one? There's no way anybody on his family is going to have the strength to get up there and do it. And there's no way, I don't even think my parents could do it. I asked one of his best friends to do it, and I can't. There's no way I'm going to be able to get up there. And so I did. I was the first one. I got up there, and at the end of the service, one of our friends, he comes up to me. I just want to tell you that I was a mess at the funeral. And then when you got up there and you spoke with such calmness and strength in your voice, he said the peace and the calmness that came over me was something that I needed today that I didn't realize that I needed. And that was real humbling to hear that I could help other people by showing them just how strong and how well I'm doing and how I'm going to do, that it helped brought them that sense of peace as well. But
Yeah, I
it's
think that's really wonderful that they got to experience that moment and they got to see you as just part of that whole ceremony and process. Here in just the last couple minutes that we have, what advice or encouragement would you give to other widows or other widows that are even just anticipatory grief, right? Like they're going through the motions, they're trying to figure out what they should do in those last few months or years that they have together. What advice would you give to them?
for the ones that are their loved one is sick and they're still here. I would say don't don't waste any time. Don't argue over stupid stuff. All that stuff is so small. And just sitting with the person is spending time with them. You don't have to go out and do a bunch of things if they don't feel well. I remember I struggled with that. I was like, why aren't we going out with our friends? Let's go. And he just didn't feel like it. He didn't feel well. And for the ones that have already lost somebody, I would say to them, if you look back on your life when you have the time to do it, God definitely prepares you along the way with all these, whether or not you want to call them trials or struggles, events. He definitely helps prepare you for what is to come and for you to even be by yourself. Even just the simple fact of Chris not wanting to go out or not wanting to go to a family event, and I wound up having to take the boys by myself. That was preparing me to do all these things that I'm having to do by myself. Chris not feeling well, and having limited time because I have more responsibilities. That was preparing me to have all these responsibilities that I have now and how to delegate my time. You are strong as a widow or a widower, and God gives his hardest battles to his strongest warriors. And he does not give you anything that you cannot handle. He is always there with you. We don't understand why we go through what we go through, but there's a reason. And I know that widow and widowers hate to hear that everything happens for a reason, but it does. Our story, our testimony is here for a reason. And I don't know who this might help or who this might reach, but I hope that it does give them faith and hope to know that even if you've been through hell and back, I'm not saying don't grieve, have your cry. There's memories of me getting Chris into the shower and holding him there. And I'm in my leggings and my shirt and I'm getting soaked and I'm bathing him in the shower. I have memories that come back and I just bawl. But then I pick myself back up because I've got other stuff to do today. And if you have children, your children are going to mimic how you grieve. So if you grieve strongly and openly, but you don't turn to the bottle, don't go get drunk, you can't drink away your grief. You do have to feel it, but feel the feelings and then pick yourself up and say, I'm still here. I'm here for a purpose. I'm here for a reason. And I'm not sure exactly what that is yet, but one day it'll be revealed. But until then, I'm going to keep living my life.
Oh, beautifully said. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for coming and sharing your story and just being willing to be vulnerable to help encourage and inspire other widows.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Are you a widow who feels disconnected? Do you feel like you're stuck or even going backwards in your grief? Widowhood can be lonely and isolating, but it doesn't have to be. Join us in the Brave Widow membership community and connect. We teach widows how to find hope, heal their heart, and dream again for the future. Find your purpose and create a life you love today. Go to bravewidow.com to get started.